Hey, welcome to What's the Tea, the TransLink podcast. I'm your host, John Jang. Here's what we're checking out on this episode. What's the story behind the famous SkyTrain chime? Let's tap in to What's the Tea.
The next station is...
Welcome to What's the Tea, the TransLink podcast.
Alright, maybe you've realized this, but we live in a world full of chimes. And if you're still not sure what that word means, a chime is described as a melodious ringing sound, as produced by striking a bell, typically to indicate the time. The most famous example of a chime would be this. Or maybe something like this. Or even something like this. The world is full of audio cues that specifically indicate something is happening. In the case of an incoming text message, you know that when you hear that sound, it can only mean a new text and you're not confusing it for another sound, like your laundry machine letting you know the wash cycle has just ended. We're so accustomed to hearing chimes in our daily lives that we rarely ever stop to think about how these sounds were originally thought up, or what the process was like behind the scenes to eventually arrive at that specific sound. But there had to have been a process, because certain sounds just make sense for certain things. Imagine, as an example, if this was the sound you heard every time a new text message came in. Yeah, that would be terrible. I would seriously never text anyone ever again. Subconsciously, there's some kind of a mental process where we would associate certain tones to indicate certain messages with differing levels of urgency or caution. It's a fascinating look into what makes our brains operate the way they do. But this is not a science podcast. This is a transit podcast. All of these little tidbits about chimes brings us to the most iconic chime that we have on our transit system, the SkyTrain chime. With hundreds of thousands of people riding the SkyTrain daily, this is a sound that's become synonymous with Metro Vancouver's rapid transit. But how well do customers like yourself actually know the chime? Producer Vince and I hit the streets to find out the answer.
There are few sounds in Metro Vancouver as iconic as the sound of the SkyTrain. It's John with What's the Tea, the TransLink podcast, out on the system today asking customers like yourself if you can imitate the SkyTrain chime. You know the sound when the SkyTrain leaves? There's that 3 distinctive bells. Who wants to be bold enough to try and give us an imitation of that sound effect?
I got it.
Yeah? All right, let's go. This guy's pretty good at what he's doing here.
How you did it, simple do.
He knows it. That's the beat. That's exactly perfect. So
Like,
that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
You're about to get on the SkyTrain here in a few moments. When you do, and as the SkyTrain takes off, you're going to hear 3 distinctive bell sounds. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
The chime?
Yep.
Can you give us your impression of the chime? It's pretty good. I think he's a natural. That's good. That's good, dude. How about give us like a remix? If you could control that sound effect and just replace it with a different sound set, what would it be? We're going to send that up to the suggestions. That was kind of right. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I like that a lot. Really appreciate some musicians here. I love their talent. So amazing. Thanks, guys.
Alright, it's pretty clear that our customers are smart and very talented. But what's the story behind the SkyTrain chime? How was it created? Who actually put these 3 notes together? For this tale, let me introduce Ian Graham, a retired SkyTrain operations planner whose legacy includes the creation of this iconic sound.
Ian, maybe you could take us into a little bit of the story about how that chime was created, designed, made. You were literally in the room when it was recorded, so maybe just take us into that moment.
Yes. Well, in the days when SkyTrain was being developed, it was developed right from the outset as an automated system with the intention that it'd be an unattended system. But without a train kind of operator, there was a need certainly to provide some audible indication for door closing. But that was typical on a lot of systems. Some of them, Toronto for many years had the train card using just a whistle, a sports whistle. Other systems did have a tone built in. So it became necessary to do some kind of an alert tone. I think at the time what the project group wanted to do was to make something that was distinctive and not too synthetic sounding. That was in the early days of synthesizers, and some of the tones were very, very different from an actual kind of musical tones. So we actually did. Well, my boss, Tom Parkinson, the systems administrator, gave me this task to go and try and come up with a tone for the door chime, taking account of what other systems did. And so we looked at both what was going to be provided from the supplier originally, which is, again, as I said, very kind of synthetic sounding tone.
Right.
Maybe futuristic, but in some ways we wanted to soften that a little bit.
Sure.
We actually tried going out and trying to record some actual gongs.
Oh, really?
In the studio.
Okay.
It didn't sort of work that well, and maybe we didn't go far enough. So we ended up doing a session, or I ended up in the session at Little Mountain Sound Studios, which was an iconic recording studio back in the 80s.
One of Vancouver's institutions.
Institutions
really.
at the time, which I think is long gone, and
Right.
I'm not sure whether there are other real successors to it, but there's certainly proliferation since then. This was in 1984, as I recall. And it was getting time to put some of these things together for the delivery of vehicles and to package up this kind of audio tones and features into the system and get them done in time. So I guess I was in there with a recording engineer, and we kind of went through a number of kind of options and tones on a digital synthesizer, and looking for something that actually sounded a bit like a gong and would be something distinctive. Knowing that people would be listening to this, many times on a trip, thousands of times in a year.
Right.
We want something that's distinctive, people recognize, but isn't too distracting and doesn't become too annoying after repeated listening. I guess some systems use sort of an upwards tone, sequence of tones, some of them use downward. It's, I guess the upward tone gave sort of a sense of departure. I think in Toronto the tones are downward, and that's sort of the impending door closing on you. So it could be either way. And after going through, a certain number of sequences, we kind of set the results back to a small team of people to evaluate, and decided they came up with this decision to use this tone, and that's what's was built into the audio devices on the trains.
Right.
It was then actually adapted and put into the B-line buses.
Right.
Because of the all-door loading there, used on the Canada Line trains. And I guess that's where it stands.
From the creation of the chime to its current usage, this three-tone alert has managed to stay relevant. But why do we need chimes in the first place? For this, we meet Ian's successor and a friend of the podcast, Ian Fisher, the manager of operations planning at BC Rapid Transit Company, or SkyTrain, and sort of our unofficial in-house chime expert.
It's a real icon of Vancouver, that three-tone ascending chime. Of course, most metros weren't automated at the time. So you go to Toronto, they had a guard would blow a whistle. Same in New York, those kind of places.
Is that when they would say all aboard?
Sometimes, yeah. Or
Right.
I guess in New York you hear, stand clear of the closing doors, please.
That's less fun
then
than all
you-
aboard, in my opinion. Just a humble thought.
Yeah. So they came up with this electronic chime because our system was going to be automated. Obviously, there'd be playback equipment to record or sort of play this on the trains, warn people the doors were closing. And that's where it started. And I guess other systems have more mechanical sounding chimes, I guess.
Sure.
Being in Germany, you got some pretty harsh buzzer sounds. In Berlin, or there's a particular 3-note descending sound that you hear in Toronto and a lot of other systems.
Please stand clear of the doors.
Is the original recording like on a cassette? Like, how did they do it? Because it was all those years ago now. When you look back.
Yeah, it is on a cassette. I think I still have the cassette.
Ian, when it comes to like how, like the function of the chime in itself, is that coming through from a centralized sort of computer that plays from one location, or do we have to like manually download this chime into every single SkyTrain? And if so, how do they know when it's time to play the chime?
Right. Yeah, so we have 2 announcement systems on the train. So the chime is usually associated with the automated announcements for the next station and the train destination. So when the doors open and the train announces where it's going, if it's ambiguous where that train might be going, given the platform that it's at. And those announcements are all drawn from a library of about 100 recordings that we have stored on every train. So they're in flash memory on the trains, which does mean that if we want to change one, we have to get a technician out there to change close to, I guess, 200 or so computers right now, manually change the flash memory on them, which is very time consuming. So we don't do those changes lightly, but that's the main chimes, as well as all the next station announcements, which side the doors are going to open, where the train's going. All of those recordings are loaded on the trains. If we have an ad hoc announcement where the control center, say, needs to make an announcement, then that's sort of live over the radio. But all of those routine ones that you hear every day, they're all recordings stored on each train.
I mean, to your point, the SkyTrain announcements have never been wrong. Like, it'll never be like, oh, the next station is Stadium Chinatown when you're actually arriving at Columbia, right? So is it designed in a way that these things can't ever really fail because it's built, designed? Like, I obviously don't know how it all works out, but I'm assuming there's a reason why it doesn't fail like that.
Yeah, it doesn't usually play the wrong announcements, fortunately.
Right.
Sometimes we have cases where the radio system isn't working properly, or there's a coverage issue, and then announcements don't get played. Those, if STAs hear them, they can often get things working by resetting a computer on the train.
Gotcha.
Especially if the door chimes aren't working, it's just a simple reset of equipment on the train. But for the other chimes or the announcements, they're programmed centrally, and then the central computer here in the control center sends codes to the train to tell it what to play at each moment.
Gotcha.
So if provided we haven't made a mistake at the programming end, you won't hear the wrong station when you arrive at one. Yeah.
Fair enough. Maybe just explain to us, Ian, like, why do we need chimes and the function that they actually serve as people are trying to enjoy their commuting experience?
Sure. Well, the door chime, I guess, is really a safety one, and that's just to warn people the doors are going to close. So if you're thinking you're going through the door, please don't go through the door if the door time has started, because you're going to block the door. Usually the doors can reopen and let people in or get their hand out of the door, but that delays everyone on the train, and sometimes it can cause a breakdown of the door. It wears the doors out faster, so we really much prefer it if people don't obstruct the doors when they close. So the door closing chime is there to warn people, try not to do that, please. And then, of course, we have the other chimes as well, just to warn people that there's an announcement coming. So it's just a way to sort of, hey, get your attention.
Right.
Something coming. Please listen. I was going to mention that the newest trains, the Mark Vs, will also have a visual warning that's a bit more obvious.
Right.
When you're, especially on the outside of the train, there'll be a light bar above the door frame that will go from green to red.
Wonderful.
When the doors are going to close. So people who cannot hear the chime will also have a cue that the doors are closing, as well as everyone else will see this much more readily than the current indicator lights are quite well hidden.
I love it. And I think the tricky thing too, Ian, is that as we kind of step back and take a look at the bigger picture, like, we live in a world where there's so many different sound effects. Like, you have a sound for your text messages. You have a sound for the alarm as you wake up. You have a sound for the emails that come through when you're at work or you're at school. How do you try to pierce the busyness of all these different chimes and sounds that people already carry with them every single day, to try and make sure that, especially newcomers or visitors to Metro Vancouver using the SkyTrain for the first time, they're able to clearly identify, like, this is what it is? And it's probably like a tricky experiment sometimes, because you got to make sure it's not lost in the busyness of everyday life, but it makes enough sense that people know what's going on.
Yeah, I guess when our chime came out, there weren't really that many. There wasn't much competition for it.
Yeah,
but,
right.
People certainly do recognize it. I guess for the door closing chime, you kind of learn by example. Okay, I hear that, the door's closed. So we don't actually educate people that that's what it means, but you learn it pretty quickly. I haven't really seen any evidence that people aren't hearing it anymore, although some people these days have earbuds and that kind of thing in. It's very hard to reach them. Maybe not so much for the door chime, but for announcements. So if there's a service disruption of any kind, they might be listening to music or whatever, they won't get the announcement, which can be a problem.
In a world full of alerts, dings, bells, beeps, and whistles, the SkyTrain chime stands in elite company as one of the most iconic sounds of Metro Vancouver. It can represent the beginning of your journey, full of endless possibilities, or it can represent the feeling of going home, back to the comfort of a familiar place. Somehow, inexplicably, this three-tone sound has stood the test of time, even finding a role in how we end each one of our episodes on this podcast. As the famous saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And you know what? Enough said. My thanks to Ian Graham and Ian Fisher for providing the insight and story behind this iconic chime. Producers Vince and Alan for always chiming in with the very best advice day in and day out. And of course, our thanks to you for listening and subscribing. I've been your host, John Jang, and until next time, have a safe trip.